Welcome, everybody. I wanted to give you a little bit of information about different forms of small business ownership. I'm going to make these slides available as well, so you can also read up and not only listen to me while I talk you through the material. So let's get started. Now, the first thing you need to realize is that a small business is a relative term. And what we mean by it is that we speak of independently owned and operated businesses. Usually those that employ less than 500 people. You will see this is already a fair amount larger than a startup when you think about five guys that spend some time together, but it's certainly not a big conglomerate like Apple, Ford, VW, or whatever, right? So small businesses are anything from entrepreneurial ventures to the good old small and medium-sized businesses that are very prevalent in Germany. If you think about Familien businesses operated by some guy. The key terms here are independently owned and operated. So they're not subsidiaries of a larger organization. They are being operated usually by the owner. Doesn't necessarily have to be. Now, these are important, especially in Germany. This is some data from the US, but the statistics for Germany look very similar, and in some cases even more dramatic. Most companies are actually small businesses, and most employees work in small businesses. They typically start in a home with less than $10,000 or 10,000 euros. And they're responsible in the US for almost 40% of the gross national product. In Germany, the number would be even higher. The key things also is what at the bottom is they're usually, for most people, a first job, and they're very innovative. So you have typically more innovations in smaller companies than in larger companies. If you take out very innovative companies like Samsung, Apple, Amazon, and so forth. So you can see here, this is a similar statistic again from the US. Germany is not all that different. That most companies are actually small. Yeah, so you see here between 0 and 19 employees, more than 5 million firms accounting for almost 90% of all firms. Yeah, and 60 to 80% of all new jobs are created by small businesses. And as I said, most innovations come from small businesses. Globally speaking, over half of all the innovations come from small businesses, and some very famous ones are listed here. The airplane, audio tape recorder, hard valves, optical scanner, personal computer, soft contact lenses, zipper. If you want to have a more recent examples, you could think about smart devices like Lockytron, Oculus Rift. You may know this headgear. 3D printers. Ultimaker was a little small business, and several of them got very famous over recent years. So when we look at small businesses, we typically differentiate three stages: birth, breakthrough, and maturity. The birth stage is really the focus of entrepreneurship. You remember, entrepreneurship is the idea of exploiting an opportunity to start a business. So here, a small business is being born. After some time, when survival in a market and the continued existence is guaranteed, then we call the second stage, which is called the breakthrough stage, where we are not so much concerned with establishing ourselves in the market, but rather sustaining ourselves and growing. Yeah, so the terms here are growth, takeoff, or scaling is another popular term. This is in breakthrough, and then maturity stage is an established, maybe small business, maybe it has grown to a considerable size, maybe it's a large business now that continues to grow, continues to have success, needs to continue to invest, to innovate, update its strategy, and so forth. What we're really interested in is the birth stage. And you would imagine that all the different businesses at the different stages have different managerial challenges, but here in this course, we want to focus on the birth stage. Because what I wanted to show you is that there are alternative paths to starting to starting a small business. And entrepreneurship, in the classical sense of a bunch of guys in a garage getting together, having an idea, building a product, and starting to sell it, is just one way of getting to small business ownership. So, do I start from scratch, invent a business, invent a product, start selling it? That's what we call classical entrepreneurship. And that's what we've been discussing so far. A second option is I can simply buy one. So I can own a small business by simply taking over from a person that has one. Yeah. Here we have concepts like acquisition, so purchase, or partnership. So I'm buying myself into the small business. A third option, very different, is do I buy a franchise? Yeah. So here I'm owning a small business that operates in what is called a franchise, a larger conglomerate. I'll give you some examples. Oh, a fourth option is that I can start a new business whilst or still being employed in another business. Yeah, here we talk about a facet of entrepreneurship that is known as intrapreneurship, being entrepreneurial while having a regular job. So I want to take you through these different options. Acquisition is the first. So entrepreneurship is the first, I should have said, but I wanted to talk to you about alternatives. So acquisition is the second option, where we purchase an existing business that some other entrepreneur has built up. What we need to do so is a process that is called due diligence. Due diligence is the process of finding out about the true financial condition of a business. And that's an important process because it's actually very hard to find out the true financial condition of a business. Because if you put yourself in the shoes of the owner of that business, if it were a very successful business making lots of money, why would you sell it? Conversely, if it's a very poor functioning business that's not working well and making heavy losses every year, why would you want to buy it? So what I'm telling you here is that the true financial condition, how it's looking, what the sales are, what the projects are for the next couple of years, is one situation, and we may or may not find out about it, because if it were all so good, then no one would ever sell it. So the challenge is that we need to do an analysis of the opportunity that presents itself when we purchase an existing business. Yeah, so we take over an existing history, either in a good one or a bad one, when we purchase the business instead of starting our own, right? And if the history or the financial condition of a business that we want to purchase looks too good to be true, it probably is. So if we put that together, there are some obvious benefits to purchasing it. So we don't need to plan, we don't need to create, we don't need to upfront invest into a new idea, into building a product or starting to sell it, etc. We usually have infrastructure in place, for example, supplies, sales, processes, materials, people even. Typically, we also have customers already who recognize the brand and already are willing to put in money to buy the products that already exist. So the downsides are that the cost of acquiring a very profitable, a successful business is usually much higher than the startup cost of the same type of business. So if a business is really running well, it's very expensive, and it's usually less expensive to come up with your own business, but you don't know whether it works as well. Yeah. So because the cost of acquiring a good business reflect the effort of the person who started it and a so-called premium charge for the business having a proven viability. So we want to pay out the guy that owned it. We're paying for an existing customer base. We're paying for existing materials, infrastructure, processes, and so forth. And of course, we need this process of due diligence, which can be flawed, can be very resource intensive, can take a lot of time, usually costs a lot of money. Yeah. So in Germany, you would say you employ a Wirtschaftsprüfer, some party that audits this company, keeping in mind that the owner usually doesn't really have an incentive to give you full disclosure, right? So the owner needs to tell you just as much as you need to hear to be able to purchase it, but not too much, so that we don't really know what the actual costs and the good premium price would be. Okay, so this is acquiring a business. A third option, starting a business, acquiring a business, is what's called securing a franchise. A franchise is a license to sell another product or use another name in business, or both. So it's a legal and a commercial relationship between the owner of what is called a trademark, yeah, some sort of symbol or name, and an individual group seeking to use that identification in business. Now that sounds very academic, but you probably all know what I'm talking about when we think about McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, these are all franchises, right? So these are, in this case, all food stores that all operate under the same name and sell the same products and so forth, but they're technically all owned, every store is owned by a different person. Yeah. What the idea behind franchising is that the franchisor, the company that has a franchise, basically has a successful script for a business. Yeah. So has figured out what products to sell, how to do the marketing, and so forth. And we know and knows exactly what the customer base is it and how to run it successfully, and offers them this script to people that want to have such a store, such a business in different locations. These people are then called franchisees. Yeah. So on the web page, I uploaded for you a, a, a link to a page that basically looks at the 20 most prominent or most interesting franchise organizations on the planet. So you can have a look at this because the webpage gives you a lot of good details. For example, the costs of securing such a franchise. And what you will see is that a good franchise, like a McDonald's, is very, very expensive to secure the license. So in franchising, we distinguish different formats. One of them is called a product trade name franchising. So what you do as a franchisor is you have the right to a name or trademark, and you sell that right to a franchisee. The other one is business format franchising, which is where the franchisor provides not only a name or trademark, but a full range of services such as training, support, infrastructures, resources, sites, marketing, or even financing. So the difference between the two formats is that in product trade name franchising, I'm basically buying rights to use a name, a symbol, yeah, the McDonald's logo if you want. And the other one, the business format franchising, I'm buying the entire script. Yeah. So now, having made that distinction, it should be clear that in McDonald's or Burger King and these types of franchises, these are business format franchising models. We're not just buying the name McDonald's or using the logo and symbol of Burger King's and then start selling anything we want. We actually all produce the same products, use the same processes. Every McDonald's looks the same and so forth. So here, this is an ongoing relationship between McDonald's as the franchisor organization and all the different franchisees that operate every single McDonald's store. And they use the entire range of services and processes and tools and materials because that's all part of that entire business model. Yeah. A good example for product trade name franchising, you find a lot of technology companies. If you are a licensee of a big electronics company like IBM or Dell, well, Dell is a bad example, and you offer your own products or services under the umbrella too. So again, we have advantages and disadvantages. The benefits are, if it's a well-run franchise, you have a recognized brand, you have resources to draw on from the franchise network, and you have economies of scale. What that means is that if you have a franchise network where you operate, say, hundreds of thousands of McDonald's stores, say, then in the purchasing of materials or services or products that you need to offer your own products, you can draw on economies of scale. In other words, you can go to a baker and say, I'm part of McDonald's. We need, across our 1,000 stores, we need 30,000 bread rolls. And you get economies of scale advantages in the purchasing price because you can speak on behalf of the entire network, right? So any one franchise, the purchasing cost will be much lower than if it's an independent one. If you go to a bakery and say, hi, I'm operating my own burger shop, I need 20 bread rolls, you get a higher price per bread roll. That should be clear. That's a key advantage of a franchise. Also, they usually have a strong support network, and they typically are believed to have a better success rate than independent small businesses. And the reason for that is that a successful franchise has a proven script. It has a proven idea for how a business can operate successfully. And in the network, you have all these franchisee organizations, these little stores, all of which operate successfully. So chances are, if you're one of them, you will also be successful. The drawbacks are two, actually they're basically three types of drawbacks. Number one, the cost of buying a franchise can be very high. On that webpage that I mentioned that is on Ilias, you can have a look and you'll see that some of the licensing, the costs of buying, let's say, a Burger King, a 7-Up, or some other franchise, trademark, or business format are very, very expensive, to the point that usually you have to apply for some very hefty credit. The second point is not only the cost of buying it, but also the so-called royalties. Royalties are sort of fees from your profit that you have to give back to the franchisor, and they cut down basically your own profit, right? And again, on the webpage, you can see that the models for how the royalties are calculated can be very different. Some take a percentage from your earnings, some take a percentage of your profit, some take and the difference between these 2 points, between earnings and profits, are very, very different, right? In earnings, we don't really have your costs as yet. So if someone takes a percentage cut of your earnings, say 10%, you have to basically add that to your costs. So it could be that you earn a lot, but you don't make a profit. If, however, you have a percentage cut from your profits, it sort of decreases what you could possibly own, right? So in other words, you can't be as successful, and an independent startup has a better chance, I should say, of making a lot more money than in a franchise. Yeah. Another drawback that I should add here is that a franchise is a form of small business ownership, and you are an entrepreneur in a sense, in that you independently manage and own a business, but not really, because you're still have some constraints imposed by the franchisor or by the franchise office. And depending on the type of franchise license, they can be very steep. Again, take McDonald's. You may own it at McDonald's, but you basically have no say in what products you're producing, what price you're selling at, how you run your processes in the store, and so forth. All of that is basically controlled by the McDonald's franchise. So you're an owner, but you don't have a lot of say in your own business. Yeah. So a lot of the advantages that you would have learned by now in the who wants to be an entrepreneur and what characterizes an entrepreneur aren't all that dominant or prevalent if you are a franchisor. So what are the advantages and disadvantages here? The advantages are you buy an existing brand name, you have proven products and proven script for a business, so you have a greater chance of success. Typically, you have support structures like training, support, advertising, assistance, global marketing schemes, and so forth. So all these are advantages. The disadvantages is that you will have startup, also sort of build-up costs, as well as ongoing costs. You have to share some of your profits. Usually you have standardized operations and restrictions on products that you're selling, materials that you're purchasing, and so forth. So you don't have a lot of that freedom in making any decision about your business. And as I said, typically you can basically calculate upfront how much money you will possibly make from a good running franchise, and that gives you some security financially. But also it takes away this idea of exponential growth, of the dishwasher to the millionaire fable of entrepreneurship. You basically, it's a lot harder than becoming a billionaire with a franchise than with an independent business. Okay, as a fourth opinion, now I want to talk about entrepreneurship. And I mentioned already that entrepreneurship is a form of being entrepreneurial while still having a job. Yeah. And it is related to entrepreneurship, but it's also something that a lot of big companies are doing at the moment as a management strategies, where we try to entice regular employees in a regular organization to become like an entrepreneur, create new ideas for product, services, or even processes, and then having them for the business to profit. Yeah. So where we see this is very often very large companies that basically trying to do a little bit what they can in becoming like an entrepreneurial organization. So big companies that have lots of rigid structures, schemes, and so forth, they want to be like the little small startups in the garage. So they're trying to create little bubbles, so safe spaces where their employees can be like entrepreneurs, can be entrepreneurial. Yeah. So we're creative employees. You want to give them some space for trying out new things, coming up with new ideas for products, or even for processes or services or other things within the context of the corporations. So become an entrepreneur while having the safeguard of regular employment, like job safety, safe income, and so forth. Yeah. So in a way, an entrepreneur is an entrepreneur within a larger organization. And usually intrapreneurial activities within a larger organization give you the space to do so, and they give you an incentive scheme to sort of mobilize you to do that. Usually that could be a bonus, like an extra salary payment, or equity. So that if you have a great idea for a new product and the company starts building and selling it, you get a share of the profits, for example. Yeah. So the idea here is that you try to get the best of both worlds. You can take some of the advantages from regular employment, like save income, job security, and so forth, and some of the benefits from being an entrepreneur. Yeah. So creativity, innovative, running your own thing, so to speak, but less of the risk. Yeah. So it offers you some of the benefits as entrepreneurship without forcing you to give up the security of a day job. And again, on the webpage, I uploaded a couple of very famous examples. One of the one that I draw your attention to is the story of the Sony PlayStation, which is probably the most famous entrepreneurial sort of case study, so to speak. So Ken Kutaragi was a Sony employee, and he had a Nintendo console at home, and he wanted to have basically a better video gaming console. And he basically, while at work, came up with the idea of a Sony PlayStation. But that was before the time that entrepreneurial activities were a management strategy of many companies. So his boss didn't do that because he wasn't employed to come up with a video game console at Sony. He had a different role there. But someone else saw a value in this product and decided that Sony should start making PlayStations. Yeah. And now, as you all know, Sony is one of the world leaders in the prospering gaming industries. And it all came from an idea that someone developed in their day job, which was technically something else. Yeah, and on the webpage and here on the slide, you see a few other ones. Another very famous one is Gmail, Google Mail. That's an entrepreneurial project that Google launched. And the key thing to this story is that Google was one of the first companies that actually gave entrepreneurial space to their employees. Yeah, so they had a famous policy for a while, not anymore, which was called the 20% time policy, which basically said in your day-to-day contract, you were given 20%, so 1 day a week, free time to pursue your own projects and ideas. So you were paid for 5 days, but you had to do your regular job for only 4 days, and 1 day a week, Google gave its employees, about 10, 15 years ago, gave the employees time and space to pursue their own little pet project. And Paul was the creator of Gmail, started on that project with this in this 20% time policy, and came up with the idea of Google Mail as we know it now. Yeah, and the key thing that it says here was at that time, you're probably too young to remember this, but I know this was a free email with lots of web storage. That was a huge drawback of the free email solutions at that time, which were CompuServe, GMX, Yahoo, and Hotmail were the major players that day, and they were clunky. You couldn't search a lot of emails. You didn't have a lot of space for emails, and that was the time when email traffic really sort of started blossoming, right? And Google came up with a free email with basically what was at the time unlimited storage, 1 gigabyte. It doesn't sound like much, but at that time it was a huge thing, right? Another example, which is very funny, is by Gore. You may know Gore-Tex, the sort of weather-proof, rain-resistant fabric in clothes and jackets and so forth. They have a great entrepreneurship story where one employee who was a guitar player, he noticed that one of the products that Gore-Tex used in his clothing could make a comfortable guitar string. So something completely different, right? So it was some sort of coated string that had a lot of the properties that guitar strings must have. And Gore actually started launching this new product, Elixir Strings, and then are the number one selling acoustic guitar string. So again, it was a piece of entrepreneurial activity that the company then later benefited from. Yeah. So if you sum all that up, the idea behind entrepreneurship is basically a management strategy by big companies that want to leverage creativity and knowledge of their employees to improve a service, save time or money, making life easier, or find out good variations for current products or new products even. Yeah. And this is usually what they do. So this is not true entrepreneurship, but it's a very lucrative, a very creative type of endeavor that these days many organizations, especially large ones, give you some space and time to be an entrepreneur. Yeah, like maybe suggestion boxes, which is the most horrible thing, but usually they have some schemas in place to allow you to come up with your own ideas, typically coupled with incentive structures. Yeah, and they could vary a little bit in how exactly that looks like. Okay, for completeness purposes, these are the main strategies for small business ownership: starting your own business as an entrepreneur, purchasing, acquiring an existing small business, securing a franchise, or becoming entrepreneurial while working for a larger company. For completeness purposes, I also wanted just to mention a couple of alternatives. One of them is partnering up. So you, instead of buying an existing small business or creating your own, you might just become a partner in an existing business. Yeah. So that typically also means you need money to buy yourself into the existing business as a partner. And typically, you become a sort of senior employee, like a co-director or a chief officer for a particular a role, usually one that the existing founder or owner doesn't really have time for. Yeah. So in the IT context, most startups are one guy that studied business and another one that studied software development. So you have a chief technology officer and a chief information officer from the startup and a chief executive officer from the startup, but typically no one in marketing, finance, or sales. Yeah, and then as the business grows, they typically buy in partners that also have a chief role, that also are directors or even owners of the company, and but they join at a later stage. These are partnering. And the other option is, if you don't want to start working for the business, then you can obviously just invest in them, which usually means you give some money into the business and you get in return an equity stake for the funding. Yeah. So you buy yourself in, you give them $1 million and they give you 10% of the profits. This is the basic model that also TV shows like The Dragon's Den, Shark Tank, or in Germany, Höhle der Löwen, how they work. They have a bunch of investors who have money. You can come up with these startup ideas, you present it to them, and they offer you money in return for an equity stake of your profits. The risk, of course, for the investor is if there's no profit, then you don't have any equity stake in it. So you give money up front and you hope that the business is going to fly and you'll get your money back and hopefully even more like this. But of course, chances of survival can be low. And in that case, your invested money is gone and you have no return for your investment. Okay, this is about it for small business ownership. Now on the webpage, you will see that I uploaded a little table, an empty table for you to fill out, which differentiates the different forms of small business ownership alongside a number of criteria like marketing, customers, and so forth. All right, thank you.